When the Zephyrian refugees first detected the small blue planet, their instruments registered something impossible, a species that had weaponized compassion. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had operated under a simple principle. The strong devour the weak, the advanced enslave the primitive, and mercy was a luxury only fools could afford. The hegemony had proven this truth across 10,000 star systems, crushing civilizations beneath their dark fleets, while lesser species either bent the knee or faced extinction. But humanity? Humanity broke every rule. They didn't just offer shelter to the fleeing Zephyrians. They mobilized their entire civilization. Within days, construction fleets were reshaping moons into habitable worlds. Military commanders were drawing up defensive strategies that treated refugee protection as sacred doctrine. And their engineers? They were building weapons specifically designed to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The galaxy was about to learn that there are fates worse than conquest. There was humanity when you threaten their guests. This is the story of what happens when a species that builds hospitals in war zones meets an empire that burns them down. When beings who risk everything for strangers face those who sacrifice everything for power. When a galaxy's most unlikely warriors prove that sometimes the meek don't inherit the earth, they defend it with prejudice. The hegemony thought they were hunting refugees. They were wrong. They had just declared war on humanity's house guests. And humanity takes hospitality very, very seriously. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came through the Deep Space Monitoring Station orbiting Pluto. Lieutenant Sarah Chun was halfway through her morning coffee when the proximity alarms started screaming across every console in the facility. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, she called out, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. Multiple vessels, unknown configuration. Commander Marcus Webb materialized beside her workstation, his weathered face creased with concern. 25 years of service had taught him to recognize the difference between routine patrol sweeps and something that could change everything. The readings on Chen's screen definitely fell into the latter category. "How many ships are we talking about?" Webb asked, watching as the tactical display populated with dozens of red dots. 47 vessels, sir. Mixed classes." Chun paused, her eyes widening as new data streamed across her screen. "Commander, these ships, they're not showing any weapon signatures. At all." Webb frowned. In his experience, ships that traveled in large groups without weapons were either incredibly confident or incredibly desperate. Given the random trajectory and the fact that they were broadcasting on every emergency frequency known to galactic civilization, he was betting on desperate. "Are they trying to communicate?" "Yes, sir. Multiple languages, multiple formats. They're asking for sanctuary." The word hit Webb like a physical blow. Sanctuary. In all his years monitoring the outer system, he'd never heard that particular request. Pirates demanded tribute, traders requested docking permits, and military vessels issued warnings. Nobody asked for sanctuary unless something terrible was chasing them. "Put me through to Admiral Harrison," Webb ordered. Priority Alpha. Within minutes, the communication reached Earth's military command center, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Colorado Rockies. Admiral Elena Harrison stood before a wall of displays showing the approaching fleet, her expression unreadable. Around her, the most senior officers in Earth Defense Network waited for her assessment. "Analysis?" she asked quietly. Colonel David Park stepped forward, a tablet in his hands. "The ships are definitely civilian, Admiral. Refugee vessels by their configuration. The largest is about 2 kilometers long, probably a colony ship. The rest appear to be converted cargo haulers, family transports, even what looks like a mobile hospital. Who are they running from?" "Unknown, but sir." Park hesitated. "The power readings from their engines suggest they've been running hard for months. Whatever they're fleeing, it scared them enough to risk deep space travel in ships that were never designed for it." Harrison nodded slowly. Earth's first contact protocols were clear about unknown alien civilizations, but they said nothing about refugee fleets. The closest precedent was the Yarkoni incident 15 years earlier, when a single alien vessel had crash-landed in the Pacific. That first contact had led to humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, membership in the loose confederation of species known as the Free Worlds Alliance, and access to technologies that had revolutionized human society. It had also revealed the darker reality of galactic politics. Beyond the Alliance's borders lay the hegemony, a vast empire that had been expanding for centuries, consuming entire civilizations with methodical efficiency. The Alliance served as a buffer zone, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the hegemony turned its attention to this sector. "Give me a translation matrix," Harrison ordered. "I want to talk to whoever's in charge of that fleet." The communication link crackled to life 30 minutes later. The being that appeared on the main screen was unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Tall and ethereal, with skin that seemed to shimmer between silver and blue, the alien possessed large eyes that held unmistakable intelligence and deep, bone-deep exhaustion. "I am Lysander of the Seventh House," the alien said, his voice carrying harmonics that the translation matrix struggled to process. "I speak for the survivors of Zephyr Prime. We seek shelter among the humans of Earth." Harrison leaned forward. "I'm Admiral Harrison, commander of Earth's defensive forces. You're seeking asylum." "We are." Lysander's expression grew pained. "Our world was consumed by the hegemony 3 cycles ago. We are all that remains of our people." The bridge fell silent. Everyone present knew about the hegemony's expansion, but hearing it from a survivor was different. Harrison could see the weight of loss in the alien's eyes, the desperate hope that had kept him going through months of running. "How many survivors?" she asked gently. 40,000 souls, Admiral. Children, elders, the wounded. We have medical facilities aboard our ships, but our resources are nearly exhausted." Harrison looked around at her staff. 40,000 refugees. It was a massive undertaking, but she could already see the wheels turning in everyone's minds. This wasn't just about providing temporary shelter. If the hegemony was actively expanding into this sector, Earth needed allies, information, and time to prepare. "Mr. Lysander," she said finally, "Earth offers you sanctuary. We'll begin preparations immediately." The relief that washed over the alien's features was heartbreaking. "Admiral, you honor us. But you must understand the danger. The hegemony does not accept defiance. If they discover you have sheltered us, let us worry about that," Harrison replied firmly. "How long until your fleet reaches Earth orbit?" 18 of your hours, Admiral." Harrison nodded and cut the connection. Around her, the command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers began coordinating the largest humanitarian operation in human history. "Communications," she barked. "I want a direct line to the President. Security, contact the Alliance Council and inform them of the situation. Logistics, start drawing up settlement plans for 40,000 civilians." Colonel Park approached her station. "Admiral, are we prepared for the potential consequences? If the hegemony follows them here?" Harrison turned to face him, her expression hard as steel. "Colonel, in the past century, humanity has survived 2 world wars, a nuclear age, climate change, and first contact with alien civilizations. We've built cities on Mars, established mining operations in the asteroid belt, and created the most advanced military in the Free World Alliance. If the hegemony wants to test our resolve by threatening refugees under our protection, they're about to receive a very educational experience." As her staff rushed to coordinate the massive operation, Harrison stared at the tactical display showing the approaching refugee fleet. 40,000 souls fleeing across the void in search of safety. It was exactly the kind of situation that brought out the best in humanity, and she had no doubt that Earth would rise to the occasion. What she didn't know was that the hegemony was already moving. Deep space sensors had detected the refugee fleet's arrival in human space, and Admiral Croft of the 3rd Expansion Fleet was preparing his response. The humans' naive offer of sanctuary was about to trigger a confrontation that would echo across the galaxy. But, for now, in the command center beneath Colorado, Admiral Harrison was focused on a simpler task, proving that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its technology or its military might. It was its refusal to abandon those in need, regardless of the consequences. The refugee fleet continued its approach to Earth, carrying 40,000 souls toward their new home and humanity toward its greatest test. In 18 hours, everything would change. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened humanity's guests. President Maria Santos stood at the window of the Oval Office, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the White House lawn. In 12 hours, 40,000 alien refugees would enter Earth's solar system, and in the past 6 hours, her administration had mobilized resources on a scale not seen since the climate wars of the 2050s. Status report, she said without turning around. Secretary of Defense General Patricia Liu cleared her throat. Madam President, Operation Welcome Home is proceeding on schedule. The Corps of Engineers has deployed construction fleets to Luna and Mars. They're beginning preliminary work on temporary habitation structures. Santos turned to face the assembled cabinet. Temporary? No, ma'am. Liu replied with a slight smile. Temporary was the word we used for the press. Admiral Chong believes we can have permanent settlement facilities operational within 6 weeks. The Zephyrians will have proper homes, not refugee camps. And the defensive preparations? Secretary of Homeland Security James Rodriguez stepped forward. The Fifth Fleet has assumed protective positions around the refugee convoy. We've also discreetly repositioned our deep space monitoring network. If anything follows them here, we'll know about it long before it arrives. Santos nodded, but her expression remained troubled. What's our read on this hegemony? Director of Central Intelligence Angela Vasquez opened her tablet. Based on Alliance intelligence, and now the Zephyrian accounts, they're a consolidation empire spanning roughly 3,000 star systems. They absorb or destroy everything in their path, typically offering 3 choices: submission, slavery, or extinction. Pleasant options. They've been expanding for approximately 3 centuries, Madam President. Their military doctrine is based on overwhelming force and the systematic elimination of resistance. According to our sources, they've never encountered meaningful opposition. Santos walked to her desk and activated the secure communication system. Give me Admiral Harrison. The Admiral's face appeared on the wall screen, the background showing the bustling activity of the command center. Madam President, Admiral, I want your honest assessment. If the hegemony follows the refugees here, can we protect them? Harrison didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am, but not without cost. Explain. The Zephyrians have provided us with detailed intelligence on hegemony tactics and technology. Their standard expansion fleet consists of approximately 200 vessels, ranging from battleships to troop transports. They rely on energy shields, plasma weapons, and boarding actions to overwhelm resistance. And our response? Kinetic weapons, Madam President. Lots of them. Our railgun systems can punch through their shields, and our missile technology is centuries ahead of anything they've encountered. More importantly, their tactics assume they're fighting primitives. They're not prepared for a species that can coordinate fleet actions across multiple star systems simultaneously. Santos absorbed this information. What about their numbers? That's where it gets interesting. The hegemony doesn't maintain standing fleets. They build ships as needed for specific campaigns, then repurpose the materials for the next expansion. Intelligence suggests they currently have active fleets in 4 different sectors, which means they can't deploy overwhelming force here without abandoning operations elsewhere. So we have an advantage. We have several advantages, Harrison confirmed. Superior technology, better coordination, and something they've never encountered before, a military doctrine specifically designed to protect non-combatants rather than conquer territory. The president leaned back in her chair. Throughout human history, military forces have been designed to take and hold ground, to project power and intimidate enemies. But humanity's entry into galactic civilization had changed that paradigm. Earth's military had evolved into something unique. A defensive force whose primary mission was protecting Earth and its allies, not expanding human territory. How are the refugees adapting? Santos asked. Dr. Sarah Kim, the newly appointed Director of Alien Affairs, stepped forward. Surprisingly well, Madam President. The Zephyrians are remarkably adaptable. They've already begun integrating with our logistics teams, providing technical expertise on their ships and detailed information about hegemony capabilities. Are they willing to fight? That's complicated, Dr. Kim replied. Zephyrian culture is inherently peaceful. They're scholars, artists, philosophers, but they've also seen their entire civilization destroyed. Many of the younger survivors have expressed interest in training alongside our forces. Santos considered this. Refugee warriors fighting alongside their protectors against the force that had destroyed their homeworld. It was the kind of story that would resonate across the galaxy if anyone survived to tell it. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication. Admiral Harrison's image appeared again on the screen. Madam President, we have a development. Go ahead. Long-range sensors have detected a hegemony force entering the outer system. Single ship scout class. They're broadcasting demands for the return of the refugees. The Oval Office fell silent. After months of running, the hegemony had found the Zephyrians. How long before the scout reports back to their fleet? Santos asked. Unknown, ma'am. Could be hours, could be days. But once they confirm the refugees are here, we can expect a full expansion fleet within a week. Santos looked around the room at her advisors, each representing a different aspect of humanity's response to this crisis. Military, intelligence, humanitarian, diplomatic. For the first time in Earth's history, all these elements were working toward the same goal, protecting people who had nowhere else to go. Admiral, you have my authorization to implement Protocol 7. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. Protocol 7 was humanity's war footing, reserved for existential threats to Earth or its allies. Understood, Madam President. Full mobilization. Full mobilization. But, Admiral, I want that scout ship disabled and captured, not destroyed. We're going to send the hegemony a message, and I want them to hear it directly. Yes, ma'am. What message? Santos smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. That they've just made the worst mistake in their empire's history. They've threatened our guests. The secure communication ended, and the president turned to address her cabinet. Ladies and gentlemen, as of this moment, Earth is at war. Not for territory, not for resources, but for the simple principle that anyone seeking safety under our protection will find it. Begin immediate implementation of the emergency defense protocols. General Liu stepped forward. Madam President, the Joint Chiefs will need to coordinate with Alliance forces. Already handled, Santos replied. I spoke with the Alliance Council an hour ago. They're mobilizing support fleets, but they made it clear that Earth is taking the lead on this operation. Why? Asked Secretary Rodriguez. Because, Santos said quietly, we're the only species in the galaxy that's ever fought a war specifically to protect refugees. The Alliance fights for member worlds, for trade routes, for strategic advantages. We're about to fight for the simple principle that nobody should die alone and afraid in the dark. As her cabinet dispersed to coordinate humanity's response, President Santos remained in the Oval Office, studying intelligence reports from across human space. In orbital shipyards around Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies, construction crews were working around the clock to complete new vessels. The industrial capacity that had terraformed Mars and established mining operations throughout the solar system was now focused on a single goal, ensuring that Earth could protect its guests. On Luna, the massive electromagnetic catapults that normally launch cargo to the outer system were being reconfigured to deploy defense platforms. The asteroid belt mining operations had been converted to weapons production, churning out kinetic projectiles and missile systems with industrial efficiency. But the most significant change was happening in the minds of humanity itself. The news of the Zephyrian refugees had spread across Earth within hours, and the response had been immediate and overwhelming. Volunteers were flooding recruitment centers. Engineering colleges were offering crash courses in xenobiology. Children were learning Zephyrian words in school. It wasn't just military preparation. It was cultural mobilization on a scale that defied logical explanation. Humans were preparing to risk everything for people they'd never met, from a world they'd never seen, against an enemy that outnumbered them by orders of magnitude. And they were doing it gladly. President Santos pulled up the latest reports from the refugee fleet. The Zephyrians were 12 hours out from Earth orbit, and their amazement at humanity's response was evident in every communication. They'd expected temporary shelter, perhaps a place to hide until the hegemony lost interest. Instead, they found a species that considered their protection a matter of honor. The president opened a secure channel to Admiral Harrison. Admiral, I want regular updates on that scout ship. Understood, Madam President. The Fifth Fleet is moving to intercept. And Admiral, when the hegemony fleet arrives, I want our first action to be evacuating Zephyrian civilians to the inner system. Their safety comes first. Yes, ma'am. We'll make sure they're protected. Santos closed the channel and returned to her desk. Outside, the sun was setting over a world that had just committed itself to war for the noblest of reasons. In a few hours, the galaxy would discover what happened when someone threatened humanity's house guests. It was about to be a very educational experience. Captain Elena Rodriguez gripped the armrests of her command chair as the UES Determination dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Around her, the bridge crew of humanity's newest battleship worked with quiet efficiency, their training taking over as they prepared for what could be Earth's first interstellar combat engagement. Contact confirmed, reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the sensor station. Single vessel, hegemony configuration. Scout class, approximately 400 meters long. Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The alien ship hung motionless against the star field, its dark hull bristling with sensor arrays and communication equipment. It was smaller than the Determination, but its very presence represented something far larger and more dangerous. "Are they scanning us?" she asked. "Constantly," replied Commander Sarah Park, the ship's tactical officer. "Full spectrum analysis. They're probably trying to catalog our capabilities." "Let them look," Rodriguez said grimly. "What they see might save lives later." The Determination was humanity's response to the reality of galactic warfare. Built over the past 5 years in the shipyards of Luna, it represented everything humans had learned about space combat since joining the galactic community. Unlike the energy-focused weapons of most alien species, human ships relied on kinetic projectiles accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The result was a vessel that could deliver devastating firepower at ranges that made traditional ship-to-ship combat obsolete. "Ma'am," called Communications Officer Lieutenant Torres, "we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony vessel." "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing an alien that was immediately recognizable as a predator. Tall and powerfully built, with dark scales and eyes like chips of obsidian, the hegemony commander radiated an aura of casual menace. When it spoke, its voice carried the confidence of a species that had never lost a war. "Primitive vessel, I am Commander Vrex of the Hegemony 3rd Expansion Fleet. You will stand down immediately and prepare to transfer the Zephyrian fugitives to my custody." Rodriguez stood slowly, her expression calm. "Commander Vrex, I am Captain Rodriguez of the United Earth Ship Determination. The beings you refer to as fugitives are refugees under the protection of Earth. We decline your request." Vrex's lips pulled back, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "You misunderstand, Primitive. This was not a request. The fugitives belong to the hegemony. Return them or face the consequences." "I understand perfectly," Rodriguez replied evenly. "Earth's position is unchanged. The Zephyrians have been granted sanctuary, and they will remain under our protection." The alien commander's expression shifted from arrogance to confusion. "You would risk war with the hegemony for a handful of defeated primitives?" Rodriguez smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several bridge officers unconsciously straighten in their seats. "Commander, let me explain something about humanity. We've never been very good at math when it comes to protecting those in need. We tend to be rather poor at calculating acceptable losses when someone asks us for help. Your bravado will not save you when the expansion fleet arrives." "Perhaps not," Rodriguez acknowledged. "But then, again, you've never fought humans before. We're full of surprises." She gestured to Lieutenant Torres, who cut the transmission. The bridge fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what had just occurred. Earth had just formally refused the demands of an interstellar empire, effectively declaring war to protect a group of refugees. "Orders, Captain?" asked Commander Park. "Disable that ship," Rodriguez said simply. "I want it intact, and I want the crew alive. Earth Command wants to ask them some questions." The Determination's weapons systems came online with a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull. On the tactical display, targeting solutions appeared around the Hegemony Scout ship. Unlike the energy weapons most species favored, human ships used a combination of kinetic projectiles and guided missiles, weapons that were difficult to defend against and impossible to ignore. "Firing solution locked," Park reported. "Fire." The Determination's railguns spoke with a sound like thunder. Tungsten projectiles accelerated to enormous velocities crossed the distance between ships in seconds, striking the scout vessel's engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. The alien ship shuddered under the impacts, dark energy bleeding from ruptured conduits. Their shields are down, Hayes reported. Engine systems offline. They're dead in space. Any response? They're trying to broadcast a distress signal, but we're jamming all frequencies. Rodriguez nodded. The hegemony scout would have no opportunity to report the encounter until Earth was ready to deliver its own message. Launch boarding pods. I want that ship secured and its crew taken prisoner. Ma'am, interrupted Lieutenant Torres. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the secondary screen, her expression grim. Captain, what's your status? Scout vessel disabled and ready for boarding, Admiral. No casualties on either side. Understood. Change of plans, Captain. Intelligence needs that ship functional. Disable the crew, but keep the vessel operational. Rodriguez frowned. Mom, we're going to send it back to the hegemony with a message. But first, I need you to escort our guests to their new home. The tactical display updated to show the approaching refugee fleet, now only 6 hours from Earth orbit. 40,000 Zephyrians, traveling in ships that had never been designed for interstellar flight, were about to see their new home for the first time. Understood, Admiral. What's the status of the settlement preparations? Proceeding ahead of schedule, Harrison replied. The Corps of Engineers has worked miracles. Luna Base 7 is ready for occupation, and the Mars facilities will be online within the week. More importantly, our Zephyrian friends have been providing technical assistance. Turns out they're natural engineers. Rodriguez smiled. Humans working alongside refugees to build homes for the displaced. It was exactly the kind of cooperation that made humanity unique in the galaxy. Admiral, what's our defensive posture when the main fleet arrives? Total commitment, Captain. Every ship, every station, every resource we can bring to bear. The President has authorized full military mobilization. How many ships will we face? Intelligence estimates between 1 and 300 vessels, depending on how seriously they take the threat. But, Captain, remember what we discussed in the briefings. This isn't about winning a conventional engagement. Rodriguez nodded. Humanity's military doctrine had evolved since joining the galactic community. Earth's forces weren't designed to conquer territory or project power across interstellar distances. They were designed for one specific purpose: making the cost of attacking Earth and its allies unacceptably high. Time to intercept the refugee fleet. 2 hours at current speed, reported Hayes. Take us to them, Helm. Maximum burn. As the determination accelerated toward the approaching Zephyrian ships, Rodriguez found herself thinking about the conversation with the hegemony commander. The alien's arrogance had been absolute, the product of centuries of unopposed expansion. But there had been something else in his expression when she'd refused his demands. Confusion. Disbelief. The hegemony was accustomed to dealing with species that calculated odds, that weighed costs and benefits before making decisions. They understood conquest, submission, and the logic of survival. What they didn't understand was a species that would risk everything for strangers, that considered the protection of refugees a matter of honor rather than policy. Contact with the refugee fleet in 30 minutes, Hayes announced. Rodriguez opened a channel to the lead Zephyrian vessel. Lysander's face appeared on screen, his ethereal features showing exhaustion and hope in equal measure. Captain Rodriguez, he said, his harmonious voice carrying across the void. We are honored by your protection. Mr. Lysander, it's our privilege to offer it. How are your people holding up? Better than we dared hope. Your people have been remarkable. The medical assistance, the engineering support, the simple kindness. We had forgotten such things were possible. Rodriguez felt a familiar surge of pride in her species. Humans had many flaws, but their capacity for compassion in the face of suffering was legendary among the Free World Alliance. Sir, we'll be escorting you to Luna Base 7. It's not permanent, but it will be safe and comfortable while we prepare more extensive facilities. Captain, Lysander's expression grew serious. You must understand what you're risking. The hegemony does not accept defiance. When their fleet arrives, Rodriguez interrupted gently. they'll discover that threatening our guests was a serious mistake. Mr. Lysander, your people have been through enough. Let us worry about the hegemony. The communication ended, and Rodriguez settled back in her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew continued their duties with quiet professionalism. Each of them understood the stakes. In a few days, Earth would face the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy. The outcome was far from certain, but they also understood something that the hegemony did not. This wasn't a war of conquest or territorial expansion. It was a war of principles, fought by people who had volunteered to risk everything for the simple belief that no one should die alone and afraid in the dark. And that made all the difference. "Captain," called Hayes, visual contact with the refugee fleet. Rodriguez looked at the main screen as the Zephyrian ships came into view. 40 vessels of various sizes, their hulls scarred by months of desperate flight, carrying the survivors of an entire civilization. They looked fragile against the vastness of space, but they represented something that the hegemony had never encountered before. They represented humanity's line in the sand. "All ships," Rodriguez broadcast on the command frequency, "welcome to the Sol system. Welcome home." Admiral Croth of the Hegemony 3rd Expansion Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable Victory, and watched the tactical display with growing disbelief. 48 hours had passed since a scout ship had vanished in the primitive system, and the vessel that had just emerged from hyperspace made no sense according to everything the Hegemony knew about warfare. "Commander Vrex's scout ship, my lord," reported his tactical officer, Sub-Admiral Yex. "But the readings are peculiar, elaborate. The ship appears undamaged, but our communication attempts are being answered by the primitives, not our crew." Croth's scales darkened with displeasure. "The humans have captured a hegemony vessel?" "It appears so, my lord. They're requesting to speak with the fleet commander." Croth had been leading expansion fleets for 30 cycles, and in that time, he had never encountered a species bold enough to capture hegemony assets. Most primitives either submitted immediately or died fighting with whatever primitive weapons they possessed. The humans seemed determined to forge a third path. "Put them through," he commanded. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. Her expression was calm, professional, and completely unafraid. Croth found this disturbing. "I am Admiral Elena Harrison, commander of Earth's defensive forces," the human said. "I assume you're here about your missing scout ship." "I am Admiral Croth of the 3rd Expansion Fleet," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of conquest. "You will return Commander Vrex and his vessel immediately." "Commander Vrex and his crew are alive and unharmed," Harrison responded. "They're currently our guests aboard Earth Station 1, where they're being treated according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war." Croth's jaw dropped slightly. Prisoners of war. The concept was almost laughable. The hegemony did not take prisoners, nor did it acknowledge any authority that could hold hegemony personnel captive. "Primitive, you have no concept of what you've done. Return my personnel immediately or face the consequences." "Admiral Croth," Harrison said, and her tone carried a note of steel that made several of his bridge officers shift uncomfortably. "Let me be very clear about Earth's position. The Zephyrian refugees are under our protection. Your scout ship violated our territorial space with hostile intent, and your Empire's record of genocide is well documented. We decline your demands. You would face the might of the hegemony for a handful of defeated primitives?" "We would," Harrison replied without hesitation. "Admiral, your Empire has spent centuries expanding unopposed because you've never encountered meaningful resistance. That changes now." Croth leaned forward in his command throne. "Human, I command 200 vessels and 500,000 warriors. What do you command?" Harrison smiled, and something in that expression sent an unexpected chill down Croth's spine. "Admiral, I command something your Empire has never faced before. I command people who are fighting to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You're about to learn why that makes all the difference." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Inevitable Victory in stunned silence. Croth stared at the blank screen, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. In 30 cycles of conquest, he had never encountered such brazen defiance from a primitive species. "Sub-Admiral Yex," he said finally, analysis of their defensive positions. My lord, their deployments are unusual. Instead of concentrated defensive lines, they've established layered positions throughout their system. Multiple orbital platforms, mobile defense units, and what appears to be a significant asteroid-based weapons network. Fleet disposition. Approximately 50 vessels, ranging from destroyers to battleships. Significantly smaller than our force, but their technology appears more advanced than intelligence predicted. Croft nodded. The humans might have superior individual ships, but numbers still mattered in space combat. 200 hegemony vessels could overwhelm 50 human ships through sheer volume of fire. My lord, interrupted communications officer Zex, we're receiving multiple transmissions from across their system. From their military? No, sir. From civilian installations. Hospitals, schools, research facilities. They're broadcasting messages of support for the refugees. Croft frowned. Explain. The entire human civilization appears to be mobilized in support of the Zephyrians, my lord. Construction facilities have been converted to refugee housing. Their civilian population is volunteering for military service. We're detecting massive industrial conversion throughout their system. This was unprecedented. In Croft's experience, primitive civilizations surrendered when faced with overwhelming force, not because their military was defeated, but because their civilian population demanded peace at any price. The humans seemed to be responding in exactly the opposite manner. Sub-Admiral, begin the advance. Standard expansion formation. I want their outer defenses neutralized within 6 hours. The hegemony fleet began its inexorable advance toward Earth. 200 dark ships moving in perfect formation. Their strategy was simple and had proven effective across 1,000 worlds. Overwhelming firepower applied with ruthless efficiency until the enemy's will to fight collapsed. What Admiral Croft didn't understand was that he was about to encounter something that had never existed in the galaxy before. A military force whose primary mission wasn't conquest, but protection. Earth's defenders weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the simple principle that refugees deserved safety, regardless of the cost. Aboard the U.S. Determination, now positioned near the outer defensive line, Captain Rodriguez watched the approaching hegemony fleet with grim satisfaction. The enemy ships were maintaining standard attack formations, exactly as intelligence had predicted. All stations, this is command. Admiral Harrison's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. Remember, our primary objective is protection of civilian assets, both human and Zephyrian. Secondary objective is demonstrating to the galaxy that threatening Earth's guests carries unacceptable consequences. Rodriguez opened a channel to her tactical officer. Commander Park, status of the asteroid field weapons? Fully operational, Captain. The mining platforms have been converted to kinetic bombardment systems. We can deliver continuous fire for approximately 12 hours before ammunition depletion. Excellent. What about the refugee evacuation? All Zephyrian civilians have been transferred to deep system shelters. Luna Base 7 reports full operational status. Rodriguez nodded. Whatever happened in the coming battle, the refugees would be safe. That was the most important consideration. Contact in 30 minutes, reported the sensor officer. All ships, implement Protocol 7 Alpha, Rodriguez commanded. Weapons free when enemy enters engagement range. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as both fleets approached the invisible line that would begin humanity's first interstellar war. The hegemony maintained their traditional formation, confident in their numerical superiority. Earth's defenders had spread into a loose network designed to maximize their technological advantages while protecting key installations. Enemy fleet entering weapons range, Park announced. Open fire, Rodriguez ordered. The void erupted in violence as two completely different philosophies of warfare collided. Hegemony ships relied on energy weapons and close-range combat, designed to board and capture enemy vessels. Human ships opened fire at ranges that made traditional space combat obsolete, their kinetic weapons crossing impossible distances in seconds. The first hegemony vessels to die never saw the projectiles that killed them. Tungsten slugs accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, punched through shields and armor designed to deflect energy beams. Ships that had terrorized 100 worlds simply vanished in expanding clouds of superheated metal. Direct hits on 17 enemy vessels, Park reported. All targets destroyed or disabled. But the hegemony had numbers, and they pressed their advance with the relentless determination of a species that had never known defeat. As they closed the range, their own weapons began to tell. Energy beams reached across space to strike human vessels, testing shields and armor designed by engineers who had studied every battle report from the past century. Damage report? Rodriguez called out as the ship shuddered under enemy fire. Forward shields at 60%. No hull breaches. All weapons systems operational. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Human ships were built to take punishment and keep fighting. But, more importantly, they were crewed by people who understood what they were fighting for. All stations, this is Admiral Harrison. The fleet commander's voice cut through the chaos of battle. Enemy fleet is attempting to break through to the inner system. All units converge on Grid 77 Alpha. Priority is keeping them away from civilian targets. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride in her species as she watched the tactical display. Human ships were breaking formation and converging on the hegemony breakthrough attempt, putting themselves between the enemy and the refugee settlements. It was tactically risky, but it was also quintessentially human. Helm, take us to Grid 77 Alpha. Maximum burn, she ordered. Captain, Park called out. Enemy boarding pods incoming. They're trying to capture our ships. Rodriguez almost laughed. The hegemony was still fighting the last war, assuming that superior numbers and traditional tactics would be enough. They were about to learn that boarding a human vessel was a very poor life choice. Let them come, she said quietly. All hands, repel boarders. Remind our guests why threatening human ships is considered poor manners. Throughout the ship, human Marines took position at critical junctions, their weapons designed for close-quarters combat in zero gravity. The hegemony warriors who breached the hull found themselves facing defenders who fought with the desperate courage of people protecting their homes and guests. But the real surprise for Admiral Croft came from an unexpected source. As his fleet pressed deeper into the system, the asteroid mining facilities that his intelligence had dismissed as civilian infrastructure suddenly revealed their true nature. Converted to weapons platforms, they began hurling projectiles at his ships with industrial precision. My lord, Sub-Admiral Yex reported, his voice strained. We're taking heavy losses. The primitives have weaponized their entire system. Croft stared at the tactical display in growing horror. His fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just hours before, was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that fought unlike anything he'd ever encountered. Instead of protecting their military assets, the humans were sacrificing everything to keep his forces away from their civilian installations. Status of the refugee facilities? He demanded. Completely intact, my lord. They've evacuated all non-combatants to the inner system. We cannot reach them without going through their entire fleet. Croft finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't a military in the traditional sense. It was an entire civilization that had committed itself to protecting guests they barely knew, regardless of the cost. The humans had not only resisted his advance, they had forced him to retreat and reconsider everything he thought he knew about warfare. Sub-Admiral Yex, he called out, his voice carrying the strain of the past day's revelations. Yes, my lord. Your assessment of human capabilities? Yex hesitated before responding. My lord, they fight unlike any species we've encountered. Their technology is superior in several key areas, but more importantly, their tactical doctrine is completely foreign to our experience. Explain. They don't fight to win territory or destroy our fleet, my lord. They fight solely to protect non-combatants. Every tactical decision they make prioritizes civilian safety over military advantage. It's unprecedented. Croft nodded slowly. For 3 centuries, the hegemony had expanded through a galaxy where military forces existed to project power, conquer territory, and intimidate populations into submission. The concept of a military dedicated purely to protection was so foreign that its strategic planning had no framework for countering it. And their morale? Unbreakable, as far as we can determine. Intercepted communications suggest their entire civilization has mobilized to support the refugees. They're not fighting because they have to, my lord. They're fighting because they want to. This was perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all. In Krotha's experience, species fought desperately when threatened with extinction, but their resolve inevitably cracked when faced with superior force. The humans seemed to grow more determined with each passing hour. My lord, interrupted communications officer Zex, we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet commander. Admiral Harrison again? Yes, sir. She's requesting a private communication. Croth considered this. Military protocol demanded he reject any communication that wasn't a formal surrender, but his current situation was hardly covered by standard doctrine. Put her through. Admiral Harrison's image appeared on the command screen, her uniform showing the signs of a long battle, but her expression remaining calm and professional. Behind her, Croth could see human personnel working to coordinate defensive operations with an efficiency that spoke of excellent training and absolute commitment. Admiral Croth, she said without preamble, I'm contacting you to discuss terms. Your surrender? Croth asked hopefully. Yours, Harrison replied, and her tone carried a finality that made several of his bridge officers shift uncomfortably. Explain. Admiral, in the past 18 hours, you've lost nearly a quarter of your fleet attempting to reach refugee settlements that pose no threat to your empire. Your forces have been unable to advance beyond the outer defensive perimeter, and our industrial capacity is already replacing the ships you've damaged. Meanwhile, you're operating at the end of a very long supply line, facing defenders who are fighting to protect their homes. Croft listened to this assessment with growing unease. Every point she raised was strategically accurate. More importantly, Harrison continued, word of this engagement has reached the Free Worlds Alliance. You're no longer facing just Earth's military. 3 Alliance fleets are en route to this system, and they'll arrive within 48 hours. This was new information, and it changed everything. Croft could potentially overwhelm Earth defenders given enough time and acceptable losses, but facing multiple Alliance fleets would turn a difficult engagement into a catastrophic defeat. What are your terms? He asked reluctantly. Immediate withdrawal from this system and formal recognition of Earth sovereignty over the Zephyrian refugees. In exchange, we'll return Commander Vrex and his crew unharmed. That's all. Harrison nodded. That's all. We're not interested in conquest or revenge, Admiral. We simply want to protect people who asked us for help. Croft found himself facing a decision that no hegemony admiral had ever confronted. For 3 centuries, expansion fleets had either conquered their targets or been reinforced until victory was achieved. The concept of negotiated withdrawal was completely outside his experience. I need time to consider your offer, he said finally. You have 6 hours, Harrison replied. After that, the decision will be taken out of both our hands. The transmission ended, leaving Croft alone with his thoughts and a tactical situation that defied everything he'd learned about warfare. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders that he wasn't sure how to give. Sub-Admiral, he said finally, what would be the cost of continuing this engagement? Assuming we could break through their defenses, my lord, 60 to 70% casualties, minimum. And that's before the Alliance reinforcements arrive. Croth absorbed this information. The hegemony had never sustained losses on that scale in a single engagement. It would cripple not just his fleet, but the entire expansion effort in this sector. And the strategic value of the Zephyrian refugees. Yet consulted his tactical display. Minimal, my lord. They're scholars and artists, not warriors or industrial workers. Their technology is inferior to ours, and they possess no significant resources. Croft realized that he was facing the central problem with hegemony expansion doctrine. The Empire's military was designed to conquer valuable targets and intimidate potential resistance into submission. It had no framework for dealing with an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything to protect refugees who had no strategic value whatsoever. My lord, called out communications officer Zex. Priority transmission from Hegemony Central Command. Krotha's heart sank. Central Command had been monitoring the engagement, and they would have questions about his failure to achieve rapid victory. Put it through, he said reluctantly. The image of Supreme Admiral Thex materialized on the command screen, his ancient features twisted with displeasure. Thex had been leading hegemony expansion for over a century, and his reputation was built on the complete destruction of anything that dared oppose the Empire. Admiral Croth, Feck said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Explain your situation. My lord, we've encountered unexpected resistance from the human military. They've proven more capable than intelligence predicted. Casualties? 47 ships destroyed or disabled, my lord. The humans have fortified their entire system and appear willing to sustain unlimited casualties to protect the refugees. Fex leaned forward on his command throne. Unlimited casualties? Yes, sir. They've evacuated all non-combatants to secure areas and committed their entire military to defensive operations. Intelligence suggests their civilian population has mobilized in support of the military effort. For refugees? Yes, sir. The humans appear to consider the protection of asylum seekers a matter of honor rather than policy. Fex was silent for several moments, his expression thoughtful. Like Croth, he was confronting a strategic situation that had no precedent in hegemony history. Admiral, he said finally, what is your assessment of ultimate victory? Possible, my lord, but only at unacceptable cost. We would need to commit additional fleets, and the Alliance has already dispatched reinforcements to the humans. The Alliance is willing to fight for refugees as well. It appears so, sir. Fex leaned back in his throne, his expression revealing the calculations running through his mind. The hegemony's expansion was based on careful resource management and strategic timing. Committing multiple fleets to capture a handful of refugees would weaken operations in other sectors and potentially invite Alliance intervention across a broader front. Admiral Croth, he said finally, implement strategic withdrawal. Mark this system as contested territory and focus expansion efforts on sectors with more favorable strategic conditions. Croth felt a mixture of relief and professional disappointment. The hegemony was abandoning an expansion effort for the first time in centuries, but the alternative was a battle that could cripple their forces in this entire sector. Understood, my lord. What about the refugees? Consider them a failed acquisition. The humans may keep their prizes. The transmission ended, leaving Croth to contemplate the first hegemony retreat in living memory. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders that would end their empire's most unexpected defeat. Sub-Admiral, he said finally, signal Admiral Harrison. We accept their terms. 6 hours later, the Hegemony Third Expansion Fleet began its withdrawal from the Sol system, their damaged ships forming up for the long journey back to Empire space. As they departed, they left behind something that had never existed in their history, a species that had successfully defied them and lived to tell about it. Aboard the UES Determination, Captain Rodriguez watched the retreating enemy fleet with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. Her ship showed the scars of 18 hours of combat, but her crew had proven that human determination could stand against impossible odds. Captain, reported Commander Park, final casualty reports are coming in. How bad? 12 ships lost, approximately 3,000 casualties. But, ma'am, the refugee settlements are completely intact. Every single Zephyrian survivor is accounted for and safe. Rodriguez nodded, feeling the weight of those losses and the pride of their sacrifice. 3,000 humans had died protecting people they barely knew from a world they'd never seen, simply because those people had asked for help. Any word from the Alliance fleets? They're standing down, Captain. Admiral Harrison has declared the crisis resolved. Rodriguez opened a channel to Luna Base 7, where the Zephyrian refugees have been watching the battle with growing amazement. Lysander's face appeared on her screen, his ethereal features showing emotions too complex for easy translation. Captain Rodriguez, he said, his harmonious voice carrying harmonics of gratitude that made her eyes water. Your people have given us something we thought lost forever. What's that, sir? Hope. And a future. The hegemony has never retreated before, never been forced to abandon an expansion. You've shown the galaxy that they can be resisted. Rodriguez smiled, understanding the broader implications of what had just occurred. The hegemony's expansion had always been based on the assumption that resistance was futile. By proving that assumption wrong, Earth had changed the strategic balance of an entire sector of the galaxy. Sir, she said quietly, you're welcome here for as long as you need. Earth's protection doesn't come with an expiration date. The communication ended, and Rodriguez settled back in her command chair to watch the last hegemony ships disappear into hyperspace. Around her, the crew began the process of standing down from combat alert and returning to normal operations. Earth had won its first interstellar war, not through conquest or intimidation, but by proving that some principles were worth any sacrifice. The galaxy would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, the story of humanity's stand would spread across the Free Worlds Alliance and beyond. Species that had lived in fear of hegemony expansion began to whisper about the humans who had fought a war specifically to protect refugees. Diplomatic missions arrived from worlds that had never before considered resistance possible. But, perhaps most importantly, the Zephyrian refugees began the process of building new lives under Earth's protection. Their artists created works that captured their gratitude. Their engineers shared knowledge that advanced human technology. Their children learned to play games with human children, creating bonds that would last for generations. They had sought shelter and found something better, a home, protected by a species that considered their safety a matter of honor. And throughout the galaxy, the word spread. Humanity takes hospitality very seriously indeed.